Picture this for a moment. You're living a simple, honest life, working hard every day to support your family and build a better future. You wake up early, do your job, come home and sleep peacefully knowing you've done your part. Now imagine that in a single night, in a split second, you discover that the people you trusted, who paid your salary, who you respected, are actually cold-blooded killers. How would you react? What would you do if you knew that exposing the truth could cost the life of the person you love most in this world? This is the terrifying reality Marcus Thompson faced when his life was turned upside down on a rainy night in Los Angeles. Marcus was just a driver, an ordinary man trying to do his best for his daughter after a difficult divorce. For 5 years, he faithfully served the Whitmore family, one of Beverly Hills' most influential families, believing he had finally found stability in life. They seemed like respectable people, she with her charity events, he with his thriving businesses. Marcus never questioned, never suspected, never imagined that behind that facade of wealth and respectability hid a network of corruption, reaching the highest levels of power, until one night, by pure chance, he became witness to something that would change his life forever, a cold-blooded murder that revealed the true face of the family he served. But discovering the truth was just the beginning of Marcus's nightmare. When the Whitmores realized he knew too much, the threat came directly and brutally. A photo of his daughter leaving school, a clear message that silence was a matter of life and death. How would you choose between seeking justice and protecting those you love? How can an ordinary man face people with enough power to make a federal prosecutor disappear without a trace? Marcus found himself trapped in a web of corruption involving politicians, judges, businessmen, people who thought they were above the law, who could buy anyone and eliminate whoever wouldn't be bought. The injustice was glaring, but the price of truth seemed too high to pay. What you're about to discover is a true story about how one ordinary person's courage can shake the foundations of corrupt power, about how truth always finds a way to surface, even when it seems impossible. It's the story of a father who had to choose between fear and justice, between safe silence and the dangerous fight for truth. Marcus Thompson wasn't a hero, didn't have superpowers, didn't have money or influence. He only had a heavy conscience and the certainty that some things are too important to ignore. And sometimes it's exactly this type of person who can change the world, one courageous decision at a time. Marcus Thompson woke up every day at 5 in the morning, not because he liked early hours, but because life as a private driver demanded it from him. For 5 years, he'd been driving for the Whitmore family in Beverly Hills, and to be honest, it was the best job he'd ever had in his life. The paycheck came right on time at the end of the month. He had decent health insurance, and his employers, at least on the surface, treated him with respect. Margaret Whitmore always greeted him with a polite smile when she got in the car, and Richard, though more reserved, was never rude. Marcus thought he'd gotten lucky in life, you know? After years working jobs that barely paid the bills, he'd finally achieved stability. His daughter Sarah could attend private school, and he'd even managed to rent a better little house in the suburbs. It was the kind of job that gives you dignity, that lets you sleep peacefully knowing you're building something solid. Sure, driving for rich folks wasn't his life's dream, but at least it was honest and paid well. And let's face it, after so much struggle, Marcus wasn't complaining about anything. The routine was always the same, and Marcus liked this predictability. In the morning, he'd take Margaret to her charity meetings, those fancy gatherings where wealthy ladies decided where to send money. She always dressed impeccably, smelled of expensive perfume, and talked on the phone about fundraising events and gala dinners. In the afternoon, it was Richard's turn, always rushing between business meetings in downtown Los Angeles. The man lived glued to his phone, talking about investments, stocks, mergers, that business world Marcus never quite understood. He knew every street, every shortcut, every traffic light in the city. He was practically a human GPS after so much time driving around. The Whitmores trusted him to always arrive on time, and Marcus took pride in never having failed. It was a job that required discretion, punctuality, and most importantly, knowing how to stay in your lane. And he knew very well how to do that, had learned early on that simple folks like him needed to respect the space of the powerful. Of course, sometimes there'd be a conversation or two in the car, but nothing too deep. Margaret liked to ask about Sarah, always showed interest in the girl's studies. Richard was more reserved, but occasionally would drop a comment about politics or economics. Marcus would respond politely, but never got too involved. He knew his place there. The Whitmores lived in a completely different world from his, full of luxury, influence, and connections he couldn't even dream of having. They frequented exclusive clubs, dined with politicians, traveled to Europe like others go to the grocery store. It was fascinating to observe from afar, but Marcus respected that distance. After all, he was there to work, not to make friends or meddle in other people's business, and this approach had always worked well for him until it stopped working. What impressed Marcus most most was how the family seemed to have everything under control. Richard always spoke with that confidence of someone who never doubted things would work out in life. Margaret organized events that moved millions of dollars as if it were child's play. They had that security that only money and power can provide, you know? It was like they lived in a bubble where real-world problems couldn't enter. Marcus sometimes wondered what it would be like to have that tranquility, that certainty that tomorrow would be better than today. He himself always lived on edge, calculating every penny, worrying about Sarah's school tuition. But watching the Whitmores, he learned there were people who simply didn't need to worry about these things. It was a world apart, and Marcus was content to be just a discreet observer. The Whitmore house was a true mansion, the kind you see in Hollywood movies. Immaculate gardens, a pool that looked like a resort, a garage with cars that cost more than most people's homes. Marcus always parked in the service area, never through the main entrance. This was an unwritten rule he respected religiously. When waiting for his employers, he'd stay in the car reading the newspaper or checking his phone, always alert to be ready when they needed him. It was a job that required patience, but Marcus had plenty of that. He learned to value these quiet moments, when he could think about life, plan Sarah's future, dream about the day when maybe he could have his own business. These small dreams were what kept him motivated, the hope that someday things could get even better. Because for someone who came from the bottom like him, any progress was already a victory. In the 5 years working there, Marcus never saw anything that caught his attention in a negative way. Sure, rich people have their secrets, their eccentricities, but nothing that seemed suspicious or dangerous. Richard sometimes received calls that made him tense, but Marcus figured they were normal business pressures. Margaret occasionally canceled appointments at the last minute, but wealthy women do those kinds of things, right? He had learned not to ask questions, not to speculate about his employers' lives. His job was to drive, arrive on time, be discreet, and that's it. And this formula worked perfectly well for everyone. Marcus earned his money honestly. The Whitmores had a reliable driver, and life followed its natural course. It was a healthy professional relationship based on mutual respect and trust. At least that's what Marcus believed, until one night changed everything forever. But you know how life is, right? Sometimes it plays tricks on you when you least expect it, and that's exactly what happened on a seemingly normal Thursday. Marcus was waiting outside the most expensive French restaurant in Beverly Hills, that place where only people with known last names or enviable bank accounts get in. He knew that location well, had dropped the Whitmores off there several times for business dinners. He was checking his phone, looking at photos Sarah had sent from school, when he noticed strange movement at the restaurant entrance. Richard was talking to a guy who definitely didn't seem to be part of the Whitmores' social circle. The man was nervous, sweating even in the air-conditioned venue, and handed a thick envelope to Marcus's boss with a haste that caught attention. That's when something started bugging him, because that scene didn't match the elegant and controlled pattern he knew. Something there didn't smell right, and Marcus began wondering what kind of business that could be. It was 2:30 in the morning when Marcus's phone rang, jolting him from a deep sleep that had been hard to come by. On the other end of the line, Richard Whitmore's tense voice left no doubt. It was an emergency, and he needed to pick up his boss at an address Marcus had never heard of. The location was in an industrial area of downtown Los Angeles, far from everything the Whitmores usually frequented. Marcus dressed quickly, still half groggy from sleep, but professional as always. After all, emergencies are part of the job when you serve wealthy people. On the way, he tried to imagine what kind of situation would take Richard to that suspicious area in the middle of the night. Maybe some problem with one of his businesses, or perhaps a last-minute meeting with international investors. These important people have crazy schedules, Marcus thought, trying to convince himself it was just another strange night at work. But deep down, something didn't feel right, and he had a knot in his stomach he couldn't explain. The rain started falling when Marcus entered the industrial district, turning the poorly lit streets into a horror movie scene. The abandoned warehouses rose like ghosts in the darkness, and the sound of rain on the car roof created a sinister soundtrack for that early morning. Marcus checked his GPS 3 times to make sure he was in the right place, because frankly, this didn't look like a place where a respected businessman like Richard would conduct business. The streets were deserted, just a few old cars parked here and there, and the street lighting was so dim you could barely make out the building numbers. He drove slowly, trying to locate the exact address, when he saw a light on in one of the warehouses. That's where Richard had arranged the meeting, in a place that seemed straight out of Marcus's worst nightmares. The driver parked at a safe distance, as he always did, and looked at his watch. He'd arrived 15 minutes early. That's when Marcus made the decision that would change his life forever. He decided to take a peek to see if everything was okay with his boss. It wasn't morbid curiosity. It was genuine concern. What the hell would Richard be doing in that dangerous place? Marcus got out of the car in the rain, approached the warehouse carefully, and through a dirty window managed to see what was happening inside. What he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. Richard Whitmore, the man he respected and and served for 5 years, was handing a black briefcase to a hooded figure. The scene was strange enough, but what came next was much worse. Marcus watched as the hooded man pulled out a gun and, without hesitation, executed another man who was kneeling on the floor. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the empty warehouse, and Marcus had to hold back a scream of horror. This wasn't a nightmare. It was real, and he had just witnessed a cold-blooded murder. Marcus's world collapsed in that moment, as if someone had pulled the ground out from under his feet. The man he knew as a respected businessman, family man, charity event attendee, had just participated in a murder as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Richard didn't even show surprise or horror. On the contrary, he checked the briefcase contents with the calm of someone conducting any commercial transaction. Marcus stood paralyzed for a few seconds, trying to process what he had seen, until survival instinct screamed louder. He ran back to the car, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest. His hands were shaking so much he could barely get the key in the ignition. When he finally managed to start the engine, Marcus drove a few blocks away and stopped to try to compose himself. But how do you compose yourself after discovering you work for a killer? The rain kept falling, and Marcus sat there in the car, trying to understand what had just happened. All the pieces began falling into place in his head. The strange calls Richard received, the meetings in unusual places, that envelope he'd seen being delivered at the French restaurant. These weren't legitimate businesses. It was something much darker and more dangerous. Marcus thought about his daughter, his ex-wife, the simple and honest life he was trying to build. How had he gotten into this situation? How had a hard-working guy like him ended up working for a family involved in murder and corruption? The reality was cruel. He hadn't chosen any of this. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now that he knew the truth, what should he do? Pretend he saw nothing? Report it? Each option seemed more dangerous than the other, and Marcus felt like a rat trapped in a cage. When the phone rang again, Marcus nearly had a heart attack. It was Richard, asking where he was and why he hadn't arrived yet. With a trembling voice, Marcus made up an excuse about getting lost in the rain and said he'd be there in 5 minutes. He drove back to the warehouse, trying to seem normal, but inside, he was total chaos. When Richard got in the car, Marcus avoided looking into his eyes through the rearview mirror. He was afraid his boss would realize he knew everything. The ride back was one of the most tense moments of Marcus's life. Richard was too calm, even whistling softly, as if he'd just left a romantic dinner instead of witnessing a murder. Marcus drove in silence, his hands sweaty on the steering wheel, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. It was as if a curtain had been accidentally lifted, revealing a world of violence and corruption he never imagined existed so close to his reality. The rest of the early morning passed like a blur in Marcus's memory. He dropped Richard off at home, returned to his own house, but couldn't sleep a single minute. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do with that explosive information. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus questioned everything about his job. How many other times had he served as a driver for criminal activities without knowing? How many other crimes had the Whitmore family committed while he innocently drove through the streets of Los Angeles? The investigation that began rolling in his head was terrifying, because every memory gained a sinister meaning. Those strange meetings, those tense phone calls, those mysterious envelopes. It all made sense now, and the sense was horrifying. Marcus realized he wasn't just a driver. Without knowing it, he had become an accomplice to a criminal operation involving murder, and probably much more. The justice he always believed existed in the world had just taken a punch to the gut, and he didn't even know if he still believed in anything. In the days following that fateful early morning, Marcus desperately tried to return to normal routine, but it was like trying to pretend he hadn't seen a ghost. Every time he looked at Richard through the rearview mirror, he no longer saw the respected businessman, but the man who had coldly participated in a murder. Marcus's hands would sweat on the steering wheel, and he'd catch himself trembling for no apparent reason during trips. Margaret continued talking about her charity events as if nothing had changed, but now Marcus wondered if that charitable money didn't come from criminal activities. He tried to act naturally, respond to questions politely, but felt his voice sounded strange, forced. It was impossible to fake normalcy when you discovered you worked for a family involved in corruption and violent crimes. Worst of all was that Marcus had no one to talk to about this who would believe him, and more importantly, would it be safe to tell someone? It was the following Monday that Marcus began to realize he might not be as good an actor as he thought. During breakfast, Margaret asked an apparently innocent question about how he'd been sleeping the past week, if everything was okay at home. home. Her tone was casual, but there was something in her eyes that made Marcus uncomfortable. Richard also began observing him more closely, making comments about how tired and stressed he seemed. "You've been looking a bit down, Marcus. Problems at home?" The question came with a penetrating look that made the driver feel like he was being analyzed under a microscope. Marcus invented an excuse about insomnia and worries about Sarah's school, but realized his explanation sounded too weak. It was obvious the Whitmores had noticed the change in his behavior, and this was extremely dangerous. If they suspected he knew something about that night at the warehouse, Marcus didn't want to imagine the consequences. The paranoia started slowly, like an itch you can't stop scratching. Marcus noticed a black car that seemed to always be on the same streets as him, but tried to convince himself it was coincidence. Then came the feeling of being watched when he stopped at traffic lights. There was always someone in the car next to him looking at him for too long. His phone started making strange noises during calls, those clicks and static sounds you see in spy movies. Marcus even took the device to a repair shop, but the guy said everything was normal. "Must be a carrier problem," was the explanation he received, but deep down he knew it wasn't that. The silent investigation happening around him was almost tangible, as if there were invisible eyes following his every move. Marcus began varying his route home, avoiding places he regularly frequented, but the feeling of being watched only increased. What scared Marcus most was how Margaret had changed the way she talked to him. Before, she asked polite questions about his family, showed genuine interest in Sarah. Now the questions were more specific, more invasive. She wanted to know details about the girl's routine, what school she attended, what time she got out, if Marcus always picked her up. Sarah must be a beautiful girl. How old is she again? Where does she go to school? The questions came with that cold smile Margaret used at social events, but which Marcus now recognized as a mask. Richard also joined the game, asking about Marcus's ex-wife, if they talked much, if she knew details about his work. It was like they were mapping Marcus's entire personal life, identifying his weak points, his vulnerabilities, and his biggest vulnerability was obvious: Sarah. Any threat to his daughter would be enough to break Marcus completely, and he was sure the Whitmores knew that. The last straw came on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after that early morning at the warehouse. Marcus was cleaning the car in the Whitmores' garage when he heard Richard talking on the phone in the office. The window was slightly open, and the words reached him with frightening clarity. "The driver could be a problem. He knows too much." Marcus felt his blood freeze in his veins, and for a moment thought he was going to faint right there. They knew. Somehow the Whitmores had discovered he'd seen the murder, and now Marcus was officially a problem to be solved. He finished cleaning the car with trembling hands, trying to seem normal, but inside was pure panic. When Richard came out of the office and greeted Marcus with that fake smile, the driver had to make a superhuman effort not to run away. The corruption he'd discovered wasn't just about money, it was about human lives, and now his life was in the crosshairs. That night, Marcus could barely eat dinner. He kept thinking about Sarah, about ex-wife Linda, about how to protect the people he loved from a situation that had completely spiraled out of control. He tried searching the internet about the murder victim, using keywords like "man killed warehouse Los Angeles," but found nothing in local newspapers. It was as if the crime had never happened, as if someone had made sure to suppress any news about the case. This only confirmed what Marcus already suspected. The Whitmores had powerful connections, capable of making a murder disappear from official records. The investigation he tried to conduct on his own only revealed how deep that web of corruption went. Marcus realized he wasn't dealing with just common criminals. He was facing an organization with tentacles reaching into police, press, maybe even the judicial system. How could a simple guy like him fight against that? It was on Friday that Marcus discovered the victim's identity, and the revelation was like taking a punch to the stomach. Browsing national news sites, he found a small note about the disappearance of Thomas Bradley, a federal prosecutor who was investigating money laundering schemes in Los Angeles companies. The man's photo was exactly the same face Marcus had seen being executed in that warehouse. Bradley hadn't disappeared. He'd been murdered because his investigation was getting too close to the truth about the Whitmores' business. Marcus then understood the real dimension of what he'd witnessed. It wasn't just a crime of passion or a settling of scores between criminals. It was the calculated elimination of a representative of justice who threatened to expose a $1 million corruption network. And now Marcus knew that if the Whitmores were capable of killing a federal prosecutor, they'd have no scruples about eliminating a driver who knew too much. The question hammering in his head was simple and terrifying. How much time did he have before becoming the next missing person? Marcus came home Friday with the feeling he was living his last days of freedom, maybe even of life. He hugged Sarah tighter than usual, observed every detail of her little face, trying to engrave in his memory those moments that might be their last together. The girl found her father's behavior strange, asked if he was okay, and Marcus had to invent an excuse about being tired from work. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that her father had gotten into a situation that could destroy the entire family? During dinner, Sarah talked excitedly about school, friends, weekend plans, and Marcus felt his heart breaking with every word. All that innocence, all that joy was threatened because of something he hadn't even chosen to witness. The guilt was devastating. Marcus felt responsible for putting his daughter in danger, even knowing he'd done nothing wrong. But when you deal with dangerous people, being innocent isn't enough protection. Saturday morning, Marcus woke up with the feeling that someone had gone through his things during the night. Nothing was obviously out of place, but there were small signs. A drawer he always kept closed was slightly ajar. Some papers on the table were in a different order. The most frightening thing was when he opened his bedroom dresser drawer and found a photo of Sarah leaving school. It was a recent photo, taken from a distance, but with enough quality to show that whoever had done this knew the girl's routine perfectly. Marcus felt his legs go weak, had to sit on the bed to keep from falling. The message was clear as water. "We know where your daughter goes to school. We know how to reach her." There was no note, no written threat, but the photo said everything. The Whitmores had escalated the game, and now they were aiming directly at what Marcus treasured most in the world. The silent investigation had turned into explicit intimidation, and he knew it was just the beginning. Marcus spent the entire weekend in indescribable agony, trying to act normally in front of Sarah, but inside he was falling apart. He called Linda, his ex-wife, made up an excuse about having to travel for work the following week, and asked if Sarah could stay with her for a few days. Linda found it strange. Marcus never traveled for work, but agreed to take their daughter. At least this way, Sarah would be away from home while Marcus decided what to do. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, constantly checked the locks, looked out windows, jumped at any strange noise. It was like living in a horror movie, except it was real, and with consequences that could destroy everything he loved. Marcus thought about running away, taking Sarah and disappearing, but knew that people with the Whitmores' power could find them anywhere. The corruption they represented had tentacles too long, too many resources, too many connections. Monday arrived like an execution day. Marcus took Sarah to Linda's house, made up a story about an urgent business trip, and promised to pick up the girl in a few days. The goodbye hug was the hardest of his life. Marcus was afraid it might be the last. When he got to work, he tried to act normally, but Richard Whitmore was different. There was a coldness in his eyes that Marcus had never seen before, a tension in the air that made every second feel like an eternity. During the morning, Richard made some calls in a low voice, always looking at Marcus through the rearview mirror with an expression that chilled the blood. Margaret was also strange, less talkative, more observant. It was as if the two were studying Marcus, deciding what the next step would be. The feeling of being judged by a secret tribunal was suffocating, and Marcus knew the verdict wouldn't be favorable. It was during lunch that Richard finally showed his cards. He asked Marcus to park in an isolated place away from traffic and then turned to face him directly. "You've been an excellent driver, Marcus. 5 years of impeccable service. It would be a shame if something happened to change that." The voice was calm, almost paternal, but the words carried a threat that left no room for interpretation. Richard continued, "Sometimes people see things they shouldn't see, things that can be misinterpreted, that can cause unnecessary problems." Marcus felt his heart beating so hard he was sure Richard could hear it. It was the moment of truth, confirmation that they knew exactly what he'd witnessed that early morning at the warehouse. The justice Marcus had always believed existed in the world was being trampled right in front of him, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. "You didn't see anything that night, Marcus. Your family depends on your poor memory." The words came out of Richard's mouth with frightening naturalness, as if he were commenting on the weather, but the meaning was crystal clear. If Marcus said anything about the murder, Sarah would pay the price. Richard then showed a second photo of the girl, this time playing in the schoolyard, completely unprotected and vulnerable. Children are so fragile, aren't they? Accidents happen all the time. It would be terrible if something happened to Sarah because of her father's excessive imagination. Marcus felt nauseous, a desperate urge to vomit, to scream, to punch that cynical face until nothing was left. But he knew any violent reaction would only make the situation worse. Richard held all the cards, and Marcus was completely cornered. The dilemma was devastating and simple at the same time. Report the crime and put Sarah in mortal danger, or remain silent and become an accomplice to murder. I hope you're a smart man, Marcus. Smart men know when they should forget certain things, and smart men also know how to protect their families. Richard put the photos in his jacket and sat back normally, as if nothing had happened. "Now, how about we get back to work? I have an important meeting at 3. Marcus drove back downtown with trembling hands on the steering wheel, his mind blank, the world collapsing around him. He had become a prisoner of a secret he he didn't ask to know, hostage to a situation that had completely escaped his control. Corruption wasn't just about dirty money or illicit business. It was about absolute power, about the ability to destroy innocent lives to keep secrets buried. Marcus realized he was no longer fighting just for truth or justice. He was fighting for his own daughter's life, and this fight would be much harder and more dangerous than he ever imagined. Marcus spent 3 days in total agony after Richard's threat, unable to eat properly, unable to sleep, not knowing which way to turn. With each passing hour, the feeling of betraying the memory of the murdered prosecutor weighed heavier on his chest. Thomas Bradley had a family, had children, and Marcus was the only person in the world who knew the truth about what happened to him. But how to report without putting Sarah at risk? That's when Marcus remembered a news report he'd seen on TV about an FBI hotline for anonymous tips. Maybe there was a way to do the right thing without exposing his identity. Wednesday night, with trembling hands, Marcus dialed the number and asked to speak to someone about a murder case. The voice that answered was a woman's, calm and professional. "This is Agent Jennifer Hayes. How can I help you?" Marcus took a deep breath and began telling his story, without revealing names at first, testing the waters to see if this woman could really be trusted. Agent Hayes listened to everything with patience that surprised Marcus. She asked specific questions, demonstrated knowledge about the Bradley case, and most importantly, didn't seem the least bit surprised by the information Marcus was providing. "Sir, what you're telling me confirms suspicions we already had about this family. You could be the key to finally getting justice done." Her words brought immense relief to Marcus's heart, but also even greater fear. If the FBI already suspected the Whitmores, it meant the investigation was real, serious, and that Marcus had gotten into a situation much bigger than he imagined. Jennifer explained they'd been monitoring the family for months but needed concrete evidence, witnesses willing to speak. "I know you're afraid for your daughter. We can offer protection, but we need you to trust us." The word trust echoed in Marcus's mind. After everything he'd been through, who could he really trust? What Marcus didn't expect was his ex-wife's reaction when he finally told her the truth. Linda had always been a strong, determined woman, but when she learned their daughter was being threatened because of Marcus's work, she exploded in a fury he'd never seen before. "How did you get into this situation, Marcus? How did you let our daughter get in danger?" But after the initial anger, Linda surprised him with fierce determination. "If these bastards think they're going to intimidate our family, they don't know the woman they're messing with." Linda had contacts in the press. She worked as a freelance journalist and knew people who could help expose the Whitmores' corruption. "We're going to take these guys down, Marcus, but we're going to do it the right way, protecting our daughter." Linda's transformation from skeptical ex-wife to fierce ally was one of the few good things that came out of that terrible situation. Marcus realized he wasn't alone in the fight, and that made all the difference. But the biggest surprise came from where Marcus least expected it. Jake Morrison, the Whitmore family's security guard. Jake had always been a quiet, professional guy who greeted Marcus politely but never made conversation. On Friday, when Marcus was cleaning the car, Jake approached him with a serious expression. "I know you saw something that night at the warehouse, and I know they're threatening you." Marcus felt his blood freeze. Another person who knew his secret. But Jake continued, "I've been working for the FBI for 3 years, Marcus. I'm an undercover agent, and you could be the missing piece we need to bring down this family of criminals." The revelation was like getting an electric shock. The man Marcus thought was just another Whitmore employee was actually a federal agent working to expose the family's corruption. "Agent Hayes told me you made contact. We can protect you, but we need you to be brave enough to testify officially." Jake explained that the investigation against the Whitmores was long-standing, involving not just murder, but also money laundering, tax fraud, and corruption of public officials. "They have tentacles everywhere: police, judiciary, press. That's why we need irrefutable evidence to bring them down." Marcus then learned he wasn't the only employee being watched. Jake had identified at least 3 other family employees who knew about suspicious activities but were afraid to speak. "Fear is their main weapon, Marcus. They make everyone believe they're untouchable, that they have too much power to be brought down. But no one is above the law, no matter how rich and powerful they are." The conversation with Jake completely changed Marcus's perspective on the situation. He wasn't facing an impossible battle. He was joining a serious investigation with resources and federal protection. The justice he thought no longer existed was there, working behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to act. The plan Jake and Agent Hayes developed was risky, but had real chances of success. Marcus would continue working normally, but now using a hidden recorder to capture incriminating conversations. Linda and Sarah would be placed in temporary federal protection, with false identities and a safe house away from Los Angeles. "It's going to be hard being away from your daughter for a few weeks, but it's the only way to guarantee her safety while we collect the necessary evidence." Jake also revealed that other agents were infiltrated at different levels of the Whitmore organization, and that the operation to bring them down was much more advanced than Marcus imagined. "You're not just a witness, Marcus. You're the catalyst that's going to accelerate the whole process. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was possible to do the right thing without destroying his family. Maybe one ordinary person's courage could really make a difference against the corruption of the powerful. The domino effect of Marcus's decision began spreading faster than anyone expected. When news that there was a federal investigation spread discreetly among the Whitmore employees, other people began coming forward. The housekeeper revealed she'd seen suspicious documents being burned in the backyard. The company accountant admitted he'd been pressured to falsify financial reports for years. Even some of the Whitmore's business partners began cooperating with the FBI, offering information in exchange for immunity. Marcus realized his courage had inspired other people to speak up, creating a wave of revelations that was dismantling the Whitmore's criminal empire brick by brick. Sometimes it just takes one brave person to start a revolution, Jake said in one of their secret conversations, and you were that person, Marcus. The feeling of making a difference, of truly fighting for justice, gave Marcus a strength he didn't know he had. The fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by determination and hope. 2 weeks after Marcus officially became an FBI informant, the situation reached a boiling point. Richard Whitmore was becoming increasingly suspicious, asking direct questions about Marcus's loyalty, testing whether he had really forgotten what he saw that early morning at the warehouse. The tension was almost palpable during trips, and Marcus knew he was walking a tightrope. One false step and everything would collapse. That's when Jake Morrison informed him that the Whitmores had scheduled an urgent meeting with their business partners for that night, probably to discuss what to do with Marcus. This could be our last chance to get a recorded confession, Jake said. If they decide to eliminate you tonight, we won't have another opportunity. Marcus felt his stomach churn, but knew the time had come to face his fear head-on. Agent Hayes had promised that a support team would be just meters away, ready to intervene if something went wrong. It was now or never. Justice depended on his courage. The meeting took place at the Whitmore mansion, in Richard's private office. Marcus was downstairs, supposedly waiting to take his boss to a later appointment, but was actually recording everything through an ultra-sensitive microphone Jake had installed in the car. What he heard made his blood freeze. Richard was openly discussing solving the driver problem definitively. He knows too much, and we can't trust he'll stay quiet, Richard was saying. It needs to look like an accident, something that won't raise suspicions. Margaret agreed coldly. His daughter could also be a problem in the future. Children talk too much. Marcus had to control himself not to vomit right there. They were planning to kill not just him, but Sarah too. The recording was capturing every word, every detail of the murder plan, but Marcus knew he still needed more. Jake had been clear. They needed a confession about Prosecutor Bradley's murder for the charges to really stick. It was when Richard called Marcus to the office that the driver knew he'd reached the most dangerous moment of his entire life. "Sit down, Marcus. We need to talk." The voice was calm, but there was a coldness in his eyes that left no doubt about his intentions. Marcus sat down, the hidden recorder working perfectly, his hands sweating cold. Richard began slowly. "You've been an exemplary employee for 5 years. It would be a shame if we had to terminate your services." Abruptly, Marcus pretended not to understand, forced a confused expression. "I don't understand, Mr. Whitmore. Did I do something wrong?" Richard smiled, but it was a smile that chilled the blood. "Let's stop pretending, Marcus. We know you were at the warehouse that night. We know you saw things you shouldn't have seen." Marcus's heart was beating so hard he was sure Richard could hear it, but he kept his expression neutral, waiting for the right moment to make Richard say more. "That federal prosecutor was meddling where he shouldn't," Richard continued, the mask of respected businessman finally falling. "Bradley thought he could investigate our business, expose our operation. He didn't understand the message when we tried to convince him to stop the nice way." Marcus forced a question. "What kind of operation, sir?" Richard laughed, a humorless sound. "Money laundering, Marcus. Billions of dollars flowing through our businesses, coming from sources the government prefers not to know about. We have politicians, judges, detectives on payroll. Bradley was threatening all of that." The confession was being recorded word for word, but Marcus knew Richard wouldn't be speaking so openly if he wasn't sure Marcus wouldn't leave there alive. That's why he had to be eliminated. And that's why you're going to have to be eliminated too, Marcus. You understand, don't you? It's nothing personal, it's just business. The coldness with which Richard spoke about murder as if it were a commercial transaction was terrifying. It was at that moment that Marcus made the most courageous decision of his life. Instead of continuing to pretend ignorance, he looked directly into Richard's eyes and said, "I understand perfectly. I understand that you're murderers, that you killed an innocent man, and that now you want to kill my daughter too. Richard's expression changed instantly, surprise giving way to fury. "You recorded this conversation, didn't you?" Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "Every word, Richard, and I'm not the only one who knows the truth." That's when the office doors opened and Jake Morrison entered, no longer as the Whitmores' security guard, but as a federal agent, badge in hand. "Richard Whitmore, you're under arrest for murder, corruption, money laundering, and conspiracy." The expression of shock on Richard's face was almost comical. The man who thought himself untouchable discovered he'd been watched for years by his own security guard. Margaret tried to flee, but other agents had already surrounded the house. The operation Jake and Agent Hayes had planned worked perfectly. The arrest of the Whitmores was just the beginning of an investigation that dismantled one of the largest corruption networks in Los Angeles history. Marcus's recordings provided irrefutable evidence, not just of Bradley's murder, but of dozens of other crimes. Politicians resigned, judges were removed, businessmen were arrested. The courage of a simple driver had brought down an empire built on blood and dirty money. Marcus testified in court, protected by a federal program, and his statement was fundamental in convicting Richard and Margaret to life in prison. "You saved many more lives than you imagine," Agent Hayes said after the trial. "Bradley wasn't their only victim. There were other prosecutors, journalists, people who tried to expose the truth and were silenced." Marcus realized his fight hadn't been just for personal justice. It had been for all the victims of the Whitmores' corruption, for all the families who had lost loved ones to greed and power. 6 months later, Marcus was in a new house, in a new city, with a new job in the Witness Protection Program. Sarah adapted well to the change, and Linda had gotten a job as an investigative journalist, inspired by her ex-husband's courage. "You did the right thing, Dad," Sarah said one night while they were having dinner together. "You fought for the good guys." Marcus smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The truth had been revealed, justice had been done, and his family was safe. He had learned that sometimes an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference, that the courage to do right can bring down even the most powerful. Prosecutor Bradley finally had justice, his family had answers, and Marcus had the certainty that he had honored the memory of a good man. The investigation that began with fear and despair had ended with hope and renewal. Marcus Thompson, the driver who knew too much, had become the man who had enough courage to change everything. Marcus Thompson's story teaches us a powerful lesson about courage and justice. He was just a driver, an ordinary man with ordinary problems, but when faced with unacceptable injustice, he chose to do what was right, even knowing the risks. Marcus could have stayed silent, could have pretended he saw nothing, could have protected only his own family and let corruption continue destroying other lives. But he understood something fundamental. When good people stay silent in the face of evil, evil always wins. The truth he revealed didn't just save the memory of the murdered prosecutor, it saved future victims who would have been silenced by the same corruption network. What's most impressive about this story is how a single courageous decision can create a domino effect that brings down entire structures of corrupt power. Marcus didn't know that other employees also had information, didn't know the FBI was already investigating, didn't know his courage would inspire so many other people to speak up. He simply did what his conscience told him to do, and that was enough to start a silent revolution that changed everything. The investigation that began with his testimony dismantled a criminal organization that had operated for decades, brought justice to dozens of victims, and showed that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Marcus's transformation from victim to hero reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference, even when it seems impossible. He didn't have money, didn't have influence, didn't have powerful connections. He only had the truth and the courage to defend it. And in the end, that was more powerful than all the Whitmores' millions, than all the corruption they spread, than all the threats they made. Justice may be slow, may be difficult, may require enormous sacrifices, but when courageous people like Marcus stand up to defend it, it always prevails. Sarah grew up knowing her father was a real man, who fought for what was right even when it cost him dearly. This story shows that truth always finds a way to surface, and that one person's courage can inspire extraordinary changes in the world. If this story touched you, if it made you reflect on the importance of doing what's right even when it's difficult, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Hit that like button if you believe justice is worth more than fear, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Sometimes the right story arrives at exactly the moment someone needs courage to make a difficult decision, and maybe you're the person who will bring that inspiration to whoever needs it most.